The chandelier light glared down on polished oak, casting long shadows over the conference table. Every advisor, every interpreter, every aide in the room seemed to stiffen as Donald Trump leaned forward, elbows planted, voice heavy with that unmistakable drawl. "America needs a base in Africa," he declared, dragging out the word needs as though it were already carved into stone. His eyes darted across the table, lingering on the young man opposite him. "And you? Well, you'd be smart to let us build it." A smirk crept across Trump's lips, the kind he wore when he believed the deal was already sealed, when power itself was his bargaining chip. The silence that followed was suffocating. No papers shuffled. No aides dared whisper. All eyes shifted to one figure, Captain Ibrahim Traoré. He sat perfectly still, his posture unbending, his face unreadable. Not a flicker of emotion betrayed him. Where Trump projected bluster, Traoré projected quiet steel. He didn't fidget. He didn't reach for notes. He simply let the words hang in the air, letting Trump's demand echo against the walls of history itself. In that silence, tension became its own language. Trump's smirk widened, mistaking composure for hesitation. But those who knew the young leader understood better. Stillness was his weapon. The contrast could not have been sharper. One man, older, louder, convinced that power lies in volume. The other, younger, measured, aware that true power often requires no sound at all. The room seemed to hold its breath, waiting for a spark, a tremor, anything to break the standstill. Because everyone knew, when Traoré finally chose to speak, it would not be ordinary words. It would be a moment that tested arrogance against dignity, and dignity was ready to strike. The silence in that room was not just about two men staring each other down. It was the silence of centuries colliding, of old empires refusing to release their grip, and of a young continent refusing to kneel again. America wanted more than a military base. On paper, it was about security cooperation. In whispered strategy memos, it was about control. Burkina Faso sat unmoved, his calm a shield against every jab. For a moment, it seemed as though time itself paused, the weight of history pressing down, waiting for him to answer. Traoré shifted slightly, his first movement in minutes. He leaned forward, not hurried, not flustered, but deliberate. His voice came low, steady, almost disarming. "Mr. Trump," he began, dipping his head in a gesture of courtesy, "we thank America for its interest." It was polite, almost deferential. The kind of opening line Trump expected, the kind of tone he could work with. His smirk returned, as though the game was already over. But Traoré was not finished. He lifted his eyes, steady and unwavering, and continued. "Africa," he said, his voice firming, "does not exist to host foreign bases. We are not here to serve as the battleground of other nations' rivalries. We are here to stand on our own." The words landed like stones in water, rippling across the room. Trump's smirk faltered just slightly, enough for those watching to notice. Traoré paused, letting the silence stretch again. He understood the power of pauses, how they forced the listener to lean in, to wait, to wonder. When he spoke again, his tone sharpened, not angry, but resolute. "Dependence is not dignity. And dignity, Mr. Trump, is worth more than any promise of wealth or protection you offer. We have seen what happens when nations trade sovereignty for favors. They lose themselves. And we will not lose ourselves." The room held its breath. The air seemed heavier now, charged with the weight of words that could not be taken back. Trump shifted in his seat, blinking, his jaw tightening. He was not used to hearing no. He was even less used to hearing it spoken with such calm defiance. Traoré leaned back, his posture once again perfectly composed. "Burkina Faso is not for sale. Africa is not for rent. Our land, our dignity, our sovereignty, they are not bargaining chips. They are who we are." Another pause. Silence again filled the room, but this silence was different. It was not hesitation, it was impact. Every eye fixed on the young leader, waiting, absorbing, realizing the gravity of what had just been said. Trump opened his mouth, perhaps to fire back, but no words came quickly enough. For once, his arsenal of insults and boasts failed him. His smirk, that ever-present mask of superiority, slipped. For a fleeting second, the mask cracked, and behind it was something he tried to hide: uncertainty. Traoré's voice lowered now, intimate, almost like a teacher addressing a student. "You speak of wealth, of protection, of power. But true leadership, Mr. Trump, is not measured by what you can take from others. It is measured by how firmly you can stand when others try to take from you. That is dignity. That is sovereignty. And without it, no nation is free." The words hung in the air like thunder rolling across the horizon. No one moved. Not a paper rustled. Not a whisper dared break the spell. It was as though the entire room, for the first time, recognized who truly held the power in that moment. And it was not the man who shouted loudest. Trump blinked. The smirk was gone. His hands shifted on the table, restless, betraying discomfort. He had entered the room certain of victory, certain that arrogance would once again carry the day. But arrogance had just collided with something it could not bend: immovable dignity. The aides around the table sat frozen, caught between disbelief and awe. They had seen leaders bend, fold, compromise under the weight of America's demands. They had never seen one so young, so calm, dismantle the bluster of a man who thrived on intimidation. Traoré said nothing more. He didn't need to. The silence after his words was louder than any speech, a silence that spoke of finality, of lines drawn and dignity preserved. Trump's eyes darted briefly, searching the room, as though looking for support, for someone to back his authority. None came. The power dynamic had shifted. For the first time, it was Trump who sat cornered, his confidence stripped bare by a reply that needed no theatrics, no insults, no volume. The moment stretched on, each second cementing the image in the minds of those present. The young African leader who stood unshaken, and the American titan who blinked first. The room held its breath. The smirk vanished. Trump blinked first. But the real shock came not in that room, but in what happened after. The meeting ended, but the moment had already broken free from the walls that tried to contain it. What had begun as a closed-door standoff began rippling outward, whispered first among aides, then trickling into the corridors of diplomacy, and finally bursting into the digital wildfire of the modern age. The clip was short, barely 2 minutes, but it was enough. A shaky recording leaked online. Traoré's calm words carrying across the internet with the force of an earthquake. Asterisk, Burkina Faso is not for sale. Africa is not for rent. Asterisk, the video spread faster than any official statement ever could. Within hours, hashtags began to trend across continents. Hashtag dignity first. Hashtag Traoré speaks. Hashtag Africa rises. In Ouagadougou, young people poured into cafes and community centers, huddling around phones, replaying the moment again and again. Finally, one student tweeted, "A leader who doesn't bow." Memes flooded timelines. Trump's faltering smirk side by side with Traoré's unflinching gaze. Captions reading, asterisk, arrogance meets dignity. Dignity wins. Asterisk. But it wasn't just Africa. Across Europe, commentators debated the significance. Some praised Traoré's boldness, calling it a rare reminder that global politics was not a one-way street. Others warned darkly of reckless defiance and speculated about how Washington might respond. On American talk shows, the split was immediate. Critics of Trump hailed it as proof of his hollow diplomacy, while his loyalists fumed, insisting the young African leader would regret disrespecting America. And yet, the more they tried to spin it, the more the moment seemed to grow beyond politics. For millions watching online, Traoré's words became more than just a clapback. They became a declaration of principle. It was the kind of soundbite that spoke across borders, across struggles. Workers fighting for fair wages in the U.S. shared it with captions like, asterisk, this is how you talk to power. Asterisk, activists in Latin America and Asia reposted it, seeing their own battles reflected in his defiance. In Burkina Faso, the reaction was electric. Streets buzzed with pride. Youth organizations organized spontaneous rallies, waving flags and chanting slogans of sovereignty. For a country long overshadowed by the interests of stronger nations, this was not just political theater. It was validation, proof that their voice could stand tall on the world stage. Meanwhile, Trump's camp scrambled. Official statements tried to downplay the exchange, insisting it was a productive dialogue taken out of context. But the images told another story. The internet had already judged. This was not the portrait of a dealmaker. It was the image of arrogance, finally checked. Diplomats whispered of shifting tides. Could this moment embolden other leaders to resist? Could the silence of dignity truly unsettle the noisiest of powers? The questions swirled faster than answers could be given. What was clear was that Traoré's response had left a mark. It was no longer just about one base in one country. It was about sovereignty in an age where arrogance still tried to disguise itself as inevitability. And as the world argued, laughed, and applauded, one truth began to crystallize. The power dynamic was no longer as simple as it had seemed. The ripples had become waves. But beyond the noise of Twitter and TV panels, a deeper truth was emerging. Beneath the headlines, beyond the viral memes and fiery debates, something deeper began to crystallize. What Traoré had delivered was not just a rebuttal to Trump's demand. It was a universal reminder that dignity is the bedrock of true leadership. For in that moment, the world saw that strength does not always roar, and sovereignty does not always need to be defended with armies. Sometimes, the quiet conviction of a leader's words can shift the balance more powerfully than weapons or wealth. It was tempting for pundits to reduce it all to geopolitics. America versus Africa, Washington versus Ouagadougou, Trump versus Traoré. But what resonated so profoundly across borders was the recognition of a timeless struggle, the small against the mighty, the unheard against the loud, the dignified against the arrogant. It was David and Goliath retold, not with slings and stones, but with silence and steel. Traoré's defiance embodied more than national pride. It carried the weight of all those who have ever been told to sit down, to accept less, to be grateful for crumbs. His words, asterisk, Burkina Faso is not for sale. Africa is not for rent. Asterisk, echoed as a declaration for every worker denied their dignity, every immigrant told they do not belong, every community expected to trade its voice for survival. This is why the clip spread like wildfire. It wasn't just Burkina Faso's story, it was everyone's story. Viewers saw themselves in Traoré's poise. They saw their own battles reflected in his calm defiance. And for a fleeting moment, they felt validated, that dignity can triumph, that arrogance can be silenced. Trump, with all his bluster, represented more than one man. He was the face of a worldview that measures everything in terms of deals and leverage, where power is a currency and those with less are meant to bow. That worldview insists that the loudest voice always wins. But Traoré's response revealed the flaw in that logic. Dignity cannot be bought, and silence is not surrender. The lesson was clear. True leadership is not about how many bases you command or how many dollars you can wave in someone's face. It is about how deeply you refuse to compromise your values. It is about standing firm, even when standing firm risks angering the powerful. It is about believing that independence is not given, it is claimed. In the days that followed, young Africans posted videos declaring their pride. American activists drew inspiration, quoting Traoré in their own protests. Commentators called it a turning point in the language of diplomacy, proof that the era of unquestioned dominance was fraying at the edges. And in every reaction, the same thread ran clear. Dignity speaks to everyone, because dignity is everyone's struggle. For centuries, arrogance has dressed itself as destiny. Empires convinced themselves they were eternal. Leaders mistook noise for authority. But again and again, history has shown that dignity, quiet, patient, unyielding, outlasts them all. And now, a young captain from Burkina Faso had reminded the world of that truth in a single exchange. The room had held its breath, and in that silence, history shifted. It wasn't a military victory, nor an economic triumph. It was something far more enduring, a moral victory, one that generations will recall when they speak of sovereignty, of courage, of leadership that stands taller than intimidation. Because in the end, the true lesson was not just about Africa, nor about America. It was about all of us. It was about the universal truth that no amount of arrogance can extinguish the quiet, immovable strength of dignity. And in that truth lies the hope that every David, no matter how small, carries the power to silence any Goliath. Trump had entered that room certain of one thing, that America's shadow stretched so wide, no leader could resist its weight. But Traoré's calm rebuttal shattered that illusion. The title of this story tells the truth plainly. Trump said Africa needs America. But Traoré's reply proved, with quiet certainty, that it's the other way around. Because what America needs, what the world needs, is not another base, another bargain, another boast. It needs the reminder that dignity still matters, that courage still speaks louder than arrogance, that sovereignty is not a commodity, but a birthright. In the end, Traoré's words did more than defend Burkina Faso. They carved out a universal truth that will echo far beyond that single room. Dignity is greater than dependence, and the voice of the young can humble even the loudest of the old. And so, to you watching now, carry that truth forward. Let it guide your conversations, your choices, your own battles with arrogance. Share this story, not just because it exposes power, but because it inspires courage. Subscribe, amplify, and stand with the voices that remind us all. Dignity, truth, and courage can silence arrogance in any arena.